Welcome to the Walking in Worship podcast. My name is Dan Shields.
My name is Chris Jameson.
My name is David Bowens.
And my name is Crystal Tate.
And this Walking in Worship podcast is really designed to help us to grow in worship and understand the meaning of worship. But today we're going to take a little bit of a different turn on what this podcast is all about. You know, with all of the events that are happening around the world, and especially in the areas of race in this country and social injustice that we've seen with George Floyd and, you know, some of the other things that are happening around the country, we thought we would just like to take, a podcast or two and just deal with some of the issues of race. Just a caveat as we start off, you know, this is really an in-house thing for us. If you're listening and you're not a part of Orchard Hill, know a couple of things here. We're with people that we love and we care about and that we respect. This is more kitchen table sort of conversation. So this isn't really not meant to be for the bigger community at large. This is really for our worship team, and it's friends who are just having some open discussion about stuff. But we thought it would be really useful for our team. But you know, if you're out there and you're listening to this and you're not a part of the team, you're welcome on the conversation. But just know that that's the context, that we're people who really genuinely care about each other, really genuinely love each other. So we're going to jump in, and I think we'll just start into some questions. We're going to keep this really open, so this should be able to, you know, any questions that we have, just take any sort of direction we want. But I'd like to start with the question to actually to all three of you. How have you guys been doing since George Floyd's death, and how have you been just processing that particular event? And Chris, we'll start it with you, if you don't mind.
Okay. It has been, for me, it's been very, I feel like eye-opening. I feel like a lot of this obviously isn't the first incident like this that has occurred. There's been many, many others, and David and I have even talked about it. It seems like it's one, sometimes, many times, almost all the time, really, these things occur, and it's like we notice them and we say, yeah, this is an awful thing, and then we continue on with our days and with our lives without fully addressing the larger issue at hand. And what seems different about this incident with the George Floyd incident is that it seems like there's now, and I don't know what the difference is. Maybe you could kind of explain what the difference would be, or maybe it's just a matter of time and it's a matter of people being like, oh, this happened so many times. Now people are starting to dig deeper than they have in the past. It's unfortunate that it seems like it's taken this, but it seems like more people are trying to dive deeper into understanding the conversation more, rather than just saying this is wrong. Why is this occurring? How does this continue to occur? And even for me, it's been an opportunity to just reflect on the way that I handle myself and the way that I approach issues of race, and not just being one of the people that just says, okay, this happened, let's continue to, yeah, it needs to change, let's move on with our life. You know, trying to really sit down and fully understand, okay, what can we do? What can I do to make sure that things like this don't occur or continue to occur, or at least, what conversations do I need to have? So yeah, I guess that's where my head's at with all of it.
And David, how about you? As far as feelings, what sort of emotions have you had, and what sort of responses have you had, really, to this particular issue, which obviously, unearths a lot of stuff from a lot of other bigger picture stuff. But just in the light of the last week, how have you felt over this last week?
Man, talk about a roller coaster. I think initially it felt like overwhelming darkness. Like genuine, I'd never felt so swallowed up in a moment as an African-American man. And I'd seen a lot of these. This one was different. And even just to kind of speak to what you asked, like, I don't know what made this one so much different. This felt like it happened in slow motion. And you watched it, and it was a blatant, really slow decision to continue the act. That's what made it super ugly. A lot of the other things, even though we noticed it really clearly that it was still a lot of bias in the actions, a lot of the other things that have happened, the other incidents, killings, murders that have happened really fast. And so people could explain it away and could find angles and ways to kind of like, well, no, this happened too fast. And there was a lot of heightened energy and resisting arrest. Or even for people who didn't resist arrest, you notice the fear element super present. There was none of that in this. There was no fear element. There was no hyper speed. Something happened. It was just a slow, it seemed like to me, obvious, blatant, slow murder. And you watched it happen over the course of 8 minutes or 9 minutes. Is between that 8, 9, 10 minutes or whatever time that people say it is. And I think that's what made people be like, wow. Wow. Like, and this time slowly taking, and he's pleading calmly. He's not even screaming or fighting. He's pleading calmly to get his breath. And it's, and it just didn't stop. And it was such a, when you see it, it put me as an African-American man in such a dark space for like 2-3 days. It was just like, I can't get out of this space. And it's so heavy and it's so dark. Dan came into my office and it was probably the first person that I really talked to about it. And I was just bawling. Like, I could barely talk for half of the conversation because I wasn't even thinking about me no more. I was thinking about my kids. I was like, man, my kids got to grow up in this. They got to experience this. This is reality for us daily. And to see something like that happen and to know in previous context of a similar experience, these men do this or these people do this, and then there's no repercussion on top of the fact that this person's life has been taken. And so you can understand the hopelessness that comes with seeing something like that and then feeling like it's highly likely that there will be no real justice, because that has been the experience on many multitudes of previous accounts of a similar incident. And so it put me in this incredible, overwhelming darkness. The only hope that I had and still have and has helped me to get out from it is the hope of Christ. And I mean, I feel so, I don't know what people who don't have that hope in their life, how they pull out from a darkness like that. I genuinely don't, because I was overwhelmed for a moment, like really and genuinely overwhelmed, like I had never been before. It was just like, I mean, physical. I could feel a heaviness in my chest that was so raw. And I said this to Dan. I was like, I feel like an open wound right now, just walking around really raw and very heightened sensitive, and as it relates to sensitivity in this area. And it just hurt, like overwhelming hurt. And I didn't know that man at all, but I know, just as an African American man, the plight of our people in this country, even currently, from what it's come to what it is and what it has turned into. And so seeing that happen again, but just the slow, blatant disregard of life, and the taking of that man's life was just, it was so visceral and just.
And to your point, I think that everyone that watched that at some point in the video said, "Take your knee off his neck."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like actually verbally said that.
Yeah.
'Cause there was many moments, even when my wife and I were seeing it, it was like, just take your knee off his neck.
Yeah. It was.
And
it was.
to your point, blatantly just.
And even the people who were on the scene, over and over and over and over. Come on, he can't breathe. Like, he's already cuffed. He's on the ground. There's 4 of y'all. One of him. Like,
Yeah, that was for me. That was yeah, there was a lot of emotion, and it was very painful to watch. And it was a funny thing, like you said, I've seen videos. I don't watch a lot of news, but I've seen videos of people like who've resisted arrest and stuff like that. Things got out of control, or things that happened fast, and you do have a certain like level of justification in your mind, like, man, being a cop is a really hard, really dangerous job. I can see how people can make really bad mistakes, even if they're not necessarily racially biased or something like that. But this was unlike anything that I'd seen before, and that was very difficult. And there was a couple of emotions. The first time I saw it, it was just shock. Like I was almost numb from it, and then I talked to you, and there was just a lot of pain inside of me. So it was very, very hard. And then I saw a second video that I hadn't seen before from a different angle, and the people there were saying, like, he can't breathe. He get your knee off his neck. He can't breathe. He's not even moving. That sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And like my first thought, man, I just boiled over with anger. Mm-hmm. And I really thought to myself, like, if I was there, either I would have hated myself for being a coward and stood there and done nothing, or I would have tackled the cop and just took the consequences. And like in my mind, I hoped that I would be the guy that would tackle the cop, and just deal with it.
And that's the feeling that I have too. I hope, it's funny because I was like, if I was there, I would have dove on the cop, and they could have shot me, and that would have been easily justifiable for them because I attacked the cop at that point.
Yes.
But then again, you never know until you're in those situations.
Right.
Because I also understand the very real fear that I have of the police. And this is not, again, to say that all cops are bad. It's just the ones that are bad, you don't know what you're getting when you're getting stopped. You don't know what you're getting until you're in the middle of it. And then it's all happening, and it's too late at that point.
Right.
And I can honestly say, I have personally, as a person, I have not had an experience that has gone horribly wrong. I've had experiences where questions were asked that were interesting, but nothing that went horribly wrong because I was hypersensitive to every single thing that I did and made sure I was overly kind, overly every single thing. But I've also saw people who did that and it went wrong. And so so I don't know that I would have, because maybe my own real raw fear of that experience could have brought me to pause, to jumping in and acting.
Yeah, and I wondered that myself, because my first thought was I would have jumped in, but then you don't know. You don't know
exactly.
until you're in that situation. You don't know how
moment.
fear could freeze you. How about you, Crystal? What were your feelings over that particular incident in the video that you saw?
Honestly, it was a range of emotions. I actually didn't even see the video the first couple of days. My husband wouldn't let me watch it. When it first came out on the news, because I'm not on social media a ton. And so when the news came on that night, he came in the room and he was like, turn it off. And I was like, what happened? He was just like, another black man killed by cops. And so it took me another, day or so, and I finally pulled it up so I could watch it. And I think, David, you nailed it when you said it was in slow motion, because it was just so deliberate. And
it was in slow motion.
Yeah, and it took it was so long. It wasn't one of those instant, like, okay, maybe you did fear for your life for maybe a not necessarily justified reasons, but maybe there was some fear there. Like there was no threat, no real threat in that situation. He was cuffed. He was down. He was begging for air. He even said at one point, your knee is on my neck. I can't breathe. I can't get air. People were asking him, even when he stopped moving, check his pulse. He's not moving. Please check his pulse. The EMTs got there. He still didn't get off of him until they forced him to get off. And it was just it just seemed so deliberate and so malicious and so bold and blatant. And there was no hesitation. And I think that is where I really felt like we went back in time, because I know I've never, as a black woman, I've seen racism my whole life. And I've lived in a variety of situations and places. And so it's always been present. And I've always known it's still there. Yeah. It still exists because I've experienced it myself. But for it to be so blatant, so bold, and just, it just brazen. And to be able to say, I'm making the decision to murder this person. And there was no fear in his face. There was, nothing. And so it takes you into kind of like that dark place, like kind of like, wow, this is where we are. That could be my husband. That could be my son. That could be my brother. Like, and you can't yes, was he accused of a crime? Were they investigating something? Absolutely. But how am I to say that couldn't be, one of my family members just going about their day?
And even that crime, I thought to myself, it was a fake $20 bill, if that's what it even was. Who knows if it was? But if it was, what is a life worth, first of all, even if he did do that? And then secondarily, like, how many fake $20 bills have I passed in my life? I have no idea. I could have passed 100. I mean, I have no idea. You know, I don't know how to tell the difference between a real one and a fake one, you know?
It wasn't like he, you know, oh, this guy's accused of just gunning down 20 innocent people. Like, nothing like that.
Totally. And if that was the case, I would have probably felt differently about it. And I think we all would have, to a certain degree. You know,
to that
if you
point,
just
what
murdered
was-
a couple people or something.
What was crazy though was that to that point, they put pictures up of the way that I believe it was the Columbine shooter.
Oh, yeah. So
The way that he was just standing there, handcuffed, like, you know, no big deal.
Nobody had him
and then they had a
facing the
picture
ground,
of the George Floyd incident.
Yes.
And it's like, how does
It doesn't make
a
any
man
sense.
that just murdered a bunch of children,
exactly.
kids, high school kids,
Right,
teenagers?
because in that case, if 4 cops would have been on him and leaning
I
on
would
him,
have
I would have
said
been like,
that makes sense.
all right,
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
I get it.
But he was just standing there,
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
and it's crazy.
Yeah, and it's just, and it does, and David, you said this too, like you have to come back to that place, and this is where I try to always center myself in Christ, and come back to that place of, we're in a broken world. And so things are going to happen. Like, I understand that terrible things are going to happen in this world, and have to remember that it is through Christ that I am not, you know, out there doing some of these things, because who knows what I would be doing. And that we just have to remember to come back to that and to love. And I've seen, you know, responses from people that I know, even on social media, that don't have that foundation and that grounding.
Yes.
And people are in a dark place.
Yes.
And they're, you know, we're confused and hurt and upset and angry. And emotions are really high. And without that grounding, I cannot imagine like how I would still be feeling and what I would be wanting to do.
Yeah.
To be honest, yeah.
Well, you know, it's the challenge too. You know, if your husband says something sharp and unkind to you, you have a loving relationship and you can get through that. If you've had a history of 20 years of him being verbally and physically abusive, and he says something, that's a whole different thing. So, the responses too, you know, I'd imagine are not just the responses of a single incident that's a shocking and malicious and ugly incident, but it's a historic thing where you've seen precedent after precedent after precedent of very similar things that have happened. Let's pivot this into a really personal for a couple minutes. You know, you guys both grew up African American in predominantly white society. You guys have both seen prejudice and injustice in your own lives and people around you. Can you describe a little bit of what that looked like and what that felt like and how you saw and perceived prejudice? Maybe some of your earliest feelings with it too, of your earliest recognition that, you know, there was prejudice out there.
I would say I was probably a preteen. As far as like my earliest memory of it, because I think before that you're not as aware of things. But I don't know if you know. There's this thing in the Black community called the talk, and it's not the birds and the bees. It's the talk about how to behave. You know, not just out in public, but around authority of figures and around the police, and what you do, what you say, where your hands are, how you. And it sounds sad, I know, but it's really like David was saying earlier, like to make sure you are being calm and your hands are visible and you're not escalating and all that. So that is something that happens in Black homes across America at a pretty early age, especially when you're starting to go out on your own with your friends and things like that. So, and honestly, I grew up in the DC area initially until I was in 9th grade. And then I moved to rural West Virginia. And so,
A little different experience?
It was a very different experience.
Yeah.
And even... So I remember even in the DC area being followed in stores by clerks and, you know, people staring. If you were in certain neighborhoods, people looking at you, staring. And even little kids, you would even see like little kids that were like looking at you or pointing to their parents or asking like why you were a different color. So I remember that. But the biggest memories started in high school when I was in West Virginia. And there were very few minorities in my high school. And we started like a club for diversity, just to bring awareness. And I remember we would put posters up like you do in high school. And like the next morning we'd come to school and our posters were ripped into crosses and swastikas. And these were kids that we were in school with. And no teacher saw what happened. Nobody saw what happened. And it was kind of just accepted. and that we were supposed to just deal with it. So it was just, it's always been that kind of thing that's like, this is the world, and this is what I have to deal with. And we're expected to kind of like eat it, so to speak, and just accept that this is what it is, and you have to behave a certain way. Because people are always, there's the points, the looks, the stares, the, being followed around. I even had friends in high school that were white, that were into, they like to steal and things like that. And they would take advantage of the fact that if we went into a store, they knew I was going to be followed and they were going to be free to do whatever they needed to do because everybody was watching me.
That's wild.
Yeah. So it's, I know that's just a small sampling, but those are some of my earlier memories, even as a child and teenager. Yeah.
I can distinctly remember one of my probably my best friend when I was a little kid was an African-American kid. And we've talked about like the talk about being colorblind and not seeing color. And a lot of times that's very offensive because you're like, I'm African-American. But at that point, when I was a little kid, I really was truly colorblind.
Kids just like who they like.
It was just a kid, I mean, I didn't think anything of it. And I remember up until I was in, I think, third grade, the first time I ran into it, it was from my family because my mom said, you've been assigned a teacher for third grade and she's a black teacher. Are you okay with that? And it was the weirdest question. I can distinctly remember thinking like,
why wouldn't I be okay with it?
I don't even know what does that mean? Like, is there and I remember even thinking like, is there a problem with that? Is this something I should not be okay with? Or like, it was a very confusing thing. So that was, I can distinctly remember that being my first encounter with like even the thought of racism, Yeah. How about you, David? You grew up in the city and,
Yeah. When you grow up in the city, like the way I did, you don't, everybody around you is like black or mixed. Like when early on, all I remember is my school was predominantly black kids. We saw the races, Spanish, Asian, and other races, but it wasn't a whole lot in the neighborhood where I grew up at originally. I remember the first time being called the N-word though. I was young, because we were at my uncle's house and he lives in a suburb of Philadelphia. And he was married to a white lady, and she had 2 kids before they got married. And so it wasn't nothing to us. They were family to us, So we bike riding all through the neighborhood, no issues at all. We riding bikes everywhere, and this is actually had it happen a couple of times. We were on our bikes far away from where my uncle lives, and people riding by. It will sound very stereotypical, but I'm telling you, this is exactly they were in pickup truck. And they drove by and it was like, go back home. You know what I mean? And we're like, I'm like, what was that? It was weird. Like I wasn't even scared because I didn't understand it. I was like, what was that?
About how old were you, did you say?
I had to be early junior high, maybe late elementary, early junior high school type stuff. And we were riding around this neighborhood, mostly white people, but we hadn't had any problems before because we hadn't really interacted that way before. Most of what my dad's work used to do, because my dad was a pastor, most of the work he used to do was working on the violence that was just in the poor city, inner city work when those things happened. And so most of our stuff was just trying to keep our people from killing each other and those types of struggles in poor neighborhoods. And so we had never really been even focused on that type of stuff, And then as the years went on, I started to notice it more and more. And then we moved just outside of Philadelphia in high school. And that's why I noticed it probably the biggest. And it really started to be really clear. Because
what sort of stuff? Like what would?
Well, the school I went to was actually, I could see it more systemically at the school. Because I remember specifically in high school, this was my last year in high school. There's other things that happened between there. But my last year in high school, this probably more affected my life trajectory at this point. I had a friend of mine who I knew their GPA and all of their schooling and everything. And so I knew what they had, and they had just come back from the counselor, talking to the counselor about college and schools and stuff like that. And then I went into this exact same counselor with very similar GPA and other school.
Your friend was white?
My friend was white.
Okay.
And they talking about, I'm talking about this college. And I talked to the counselor, and the counselor was like, just looking at your stuff, it doesn't really look like you should really look into college or anything like that. You should probably maybe look into, some trades, some, like as if there was no ceiling, there was nowhere for me to go. It was just like, and I just accepted it for what it was. And then when I came out, I was like, why can he? I know his stuff. I know his information. We're really close. We spent a lot of time together. I was like, why am I not good enough? What about me? Why can't I look into colleges and why can't I, And so I just accepted it for what it was because I was just used to that. And so I didn't try at that point. So I just started working on the job after I graduated high school, and it kind of felt dead-endish, and I just felt like I needed to get out of the city, which is what ended up getting me here to Pittsburgh. But it kind of dead-ended me there because I had a person who was supposed to help guide me. This was like a guidance counselor, and she straight up just was like, nah, you should probably look into something else. You're probably not going to get in any schools. No. And I was just like, dang, so there's no hope for me at all? And then that kind of thing. And I just kind of accepted for what I was the kid in my family who just wouldn't fight. I accepted everything at face value and just kind of went with it. And if I had any fight in me at that point, I would have said something to my parents. I would have, but I just didn't. I was just like, I just want people to like me. And if this is what it is, then this is what it was. Because I'm still young and pretty impressionable at the time. And I just accepted it for what it was and didn't even want to go past it. And that was more of a systemic thing than it felt like a direct personal thing. But I realized how that affected trajectory for me and what I saw as possibility for me,
Yeah. It's funny because I think, we've, the whole country starting to wrestle with issues of institutionalized racism and some of the institutions that there's a racial bias that's been sewed in that we really haven't seen. But it's funny, as you said that, I was like, that's a systemic institutionalized racism, but that was a human being that looked you in the eye and said something based on possibly based on the color of your skin, likely that was the motivation behind that, but it's a person behind it. It's not just an institution.
And that's the thing. I think I've seen something that someone posted recently where he did it's like, how to do those little really simple cartoons to illustrate what this means. And beautiful, very well executed in terms of the systemic, how it is and how it's hard to affect systemic racism because it's a bunch of individuals who are in the system that make these decisions, and therefore it makes the system. But there's too many different things that are happening for you it's to almost impact the whole system as like this one thing that you can grab. It's like trying to grab water or like I can't get a hold of the one thing that would affect it all because there's so many pieces from the system being run by a bunch of flawed people.
Yes.
And therefore it creates and builds and kind of upholds the system because of the many flawed people that are affected or part of it.
And it does eventually, it all comes down to human beings again at the end of the day. Martin Luther King said something to the effect of, he said, the law might not be able to help somebody to love me, but it can stop them from lynching me. And I think that's pretty important.
Definitely.
So, and we were talking again earlier when we had some discussion, we were talking about, people will say something like, I'm colorblind or something like that. And the intent might be really good behind it, but it's very painful and it can be hurtful because you say, I'm an African-American person. I want you to see me as that, I'm a man or I'm a woman. I want you to see me as that. I'm who I am. And I want you to love me and respect me and value me for who I am, not for something else. But, when you look at the institutions themselves and the law, especially, those things really do need to be colorblind. I was talking to David the other day and I said, there was an interesting thing that happened in the symphonies across the nation. A number of years ago, they realized that the symphonies themselves were becoming ethnically homogenized largely. And they started scratching their head and saying like, okay, maybe this is something that, it's the culture that they grew up in or something like that makes them excellent musicians, but maybe not. Maybe we're missing something here. So they started doing what they called blind auditions, and they were literally blind auditions. They'd put a blind up and they'd have somebody come and they'd play with the symphony and they would just simply play, but you couldn't see who they were. And they would walk away and guess what?
Got a little more diverse?
It got a lot more diverse. The symphonies all of a sudden changed.
Yeah.
And if you look at the makeup of the symphonies now, there's still some like homogenous things, but it's much, much more diverse than it was 20 years ago. And so it showed that it wasn't necessarily about talent and skill. It was about something visual, you know? Let's talk a little bit about that. What do you think can be done about, I know this is really big, and maybe none of us in this room can really do anything, but you know, if you have any thoughts on institutionalized racism and, you know, the laws and the justice system and even the system itself as a whole that we see in America. Is there anything you guys have any thoughts on that and what can be done about that?
I think
I know this gets deep fast.
I feel like you would need to, I think that sort of idea of, in some areas, like when it comes to, like specifically like that one was music, but trying to figure out how can we build that system into more other different avenues.
Yeah, like it's an easy one. For instance, if you look at sports, for instance, you know, I think the Pittsburgh Steelers, they don't care if you're, you know, from Alaska. They don't, as long as you can catch the ball or throw, you know what I mean? So because it's a money-based thing. Right. Whoever's the most talented team is going to make the most money. So it's a system that itself, like, sort of.
But again, to that point though, it's all layered. Like, so while that may be like they want to win, well, how much are they paying him?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
true,
so
true.
where are the different, because it's all individuals, I feel like, and just personally growing up, it was just never a conversation. And I think that's the issue, is that it needs to be a conversation. Like, yeah, it's one thing to say, well, if you're a little kid, Mom, why is that person black? Well, because God made him that way. But it can't just end there, because there's so much more to that. Like, let's educate. Like, what does it mean though to be a black individual in this society today? What baggage comes with that? Because as a young kid, I'm just looking at the color of someone's skin, asking the question, oh, God made him that way? Okay. But then that's where the conversation ends. And then how are we then growing up in a predominantly white area, when you get so consumed with your bubble of where you live and you don't start to experience life outside of that bubble, then you just, again, which I see a lot now, people saying, like, you just don't know what you don't know. And you're just uneducated and you're just unaware because it's not in your, you know, you're not seeing it every single day. And I think getting back to even the beginning of the conversation, whenever I had said what made this one incident so different, that was I think that in and of itself, like, seeing how it was so drawn out, where like anyone of any color, of any race, can look at that and say that's wrong. And I think it's unfortunate that other situations have occurred and they haven't had that same response. But I feel like the only thing that can be done is to start affecting, even just having like a little daughter now who's 2 months old, making sure that it's more of a, yes, that's the way God made them, but then what does that mean? And what does that carry with it? And how do we start to instill in our children? Because they're the next generation of all of this. And so clearly there have been improvements, but it's not been incremental. Like, it's not been big enough. It's not been big enough improvements. So what do I tell my daughter, and what do I explain to her to make her grow up in a world where we start to value each other regardless of the color of our skin? It's not that we're colorblind. It's that we look at the person's color and we say, you have value. You have value. And we start to figure out and work together and have a relationship with each other. I think that's one thing that we've discussed a lot, is like, we just need to hang out with people. We need to talk to them. We need to, you know, bring up questions that sometimes can feel like landmines where you don't want to say something. But I think we need to find people that we trust and that we love and that know our heart, so that when we do step on those landmines, they can say, Chris, you probably shouldn't say that, or you probably shouldn't have said that. But it's important because, again, I've grown up in a bubble. And I've grown up in Wexford and North Hills, and it's predominantly white, and I don't know what I don't know. And we can't just assume that because we don't know these things, okay, well, I'm never going to have to worry about it, so I'm just going to continue living my life. But the impact that then has is no impact, because you're just living within your bubble, and you're not. And then from generation to generation, you're essentially saying, well, this isn't a topic that needs to be discussed, so we'll just keep living our life. All of that to be said, I think the biggest thing that we can do, and this is just me personally, and I know myself too, is to just invest more in relationships, invest more in conversations, invest more in getting out of my bubble, popping the bubble, and essentially beginning to really look and see the value in every single individual of every single color and race and background. And because that's ultimately too what the Bible talks about. Like you were saying in
100%.
Revelations, every tribe, every nation, every tongue, everyone, we are all children of God. Okay, well then how do we start acting like it?
Yeah, because if you're a Christian and you don't like some other races, you had better deal with that because you're going to spend all of eternity with them, So you better get used to it fast,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so just to jump back into the institutional thing, and I don't even know if maybe this is a dead-end question. And the thing I guess I was trying to say, Martin Luther King, he said, I look forward to an age where I'm not judged by the color of my skin, but the content of my character. People they want the judgment on them to be on what they do and their skills and their abilities. And, they don't want there to be some other thing that, like you walking into the counselor and getting two different pieces of information, probably not based on your skill sets. Because you had really similar skill sets. You had a similar GPA, you had similar capabilities, but yet there was a different path that was recommended for you, probably because of the color of your skin. Nobody wants that. I mean, that's obvious, overt brokenness that's messed up. How do we start to deal with that? Or is that what Chris was saying? Maybe it's really the relational thing, and starting from the youngest age.
It always comes down to people because the laws are the laws, but they are subjective. And it comes down to the people enforcing the laws and the people, even juries and, and all of that with punishment, with sentencing, with guilty or not guilty. All of that comes down to people. We do have laws in place, but the system is run by human beings. And just like the guidance counselor that could see David and say, I'm going to give you a different recommendation than the guy that just came in here, a close friend of yours that just came in here with very similar skills.
It's just an institution, but it's a person.
But it's a person.
Yeah, you're right.
Because at the end of the day, the law is the law. That is the good thing of it. What's so beautiful about the law is that the law is the law. However, it is human beings that are enforcing that law.
Yes.
And without addressing that, and I think, Chris, you really hit the nail on the head. It has to start with people. And I've had several conversations over my lifetime, especially, again, going into a predominantly white area and after being in a predominantly, Black and mixed area. So, and even now, and in the last week or so, with other members of our church, other friends of mine, because my friend set is very mixed. And I've had a lot of conversations with people that are like, white people that have reached out to me and like, I don't know what to say. But this is wrong. I know this is wrong.
Yeah.
I haven't had your experience, but like wanting to talk about it and wanting to understand, like, what has it been like, for you growing up and now, like, and really wanting to get that understanding. And I think that, I know a lot of people would be, maybe angered by conversations like that, but I think that's where we start because like you said, you don't know what you don't know. My experience growing up as even a light-skinned Black woman is very different than David's experience growing up as a brown-skinned man. Like it's a very different experience. So, and I have no idea what your experience has been growing up, Chris and Dan. Like it's just been, so until we start to embrace each other's differences, our backgrounds, how we've grown up, like our cultures, what was it like for you? Like to actually see color, to see it and accept it and acknowledge it and be like, but what has that been like for you? Because that has shaped our experiences as people. And so to really get to know that and to sit down and be like, we're essentially the same. We're all people. We're all of us with all of our differences. We're all created in the image of God. God created us all differently. He loves us all the same, but we are all in all of our differences, even looking in this room, all of us are created in God's image. So to be able to say that, yes, this is God's image. We are all, in essence, we are all the same. But what has your experience been like? Growing up in this country or even in other countries, and just starting to embrace that and understand that. I think until we start to do that and start to have those hard conversations, and teach our kids differently, because they don't know. They grow up, they grow up and they, like you said, you didn't know, when you were little. I didn't know when I was little. You just play with your friends. You like who you like. But to start to really talk to them about that and say, hey, this is some stuff you might see out there, and I don't agree with it. Like this is not how we feel about people. We love people. We love like God loves. Yeah. And to really start to have those conversations, I think that's the only way we're going to be able to change it, because the system is run by people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because if you believe in God and you believe that God created all people, then if he did so, there's a purpose behind it and there's a reason for it. And instead of just putting a blanket over that purpose and just saying, deciding now humans deciding who is valuable and who's not valuable, it didn't start with humans. It started with God. God did this on purpose, so we need to figure out why he did this. Right. And we need to understand it. Right. Yeah. This isn't a man-made thing.
That's right.
We were created by God. Yes. And so it's like there's a reason that we're all different color.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Let's start to unpack all this
because
stuff.
Everything that God does is beautiful and right,
Yeah.
Definitely.
And it's funny, prejudice are funny things, because I think there's in cultures, there's brokenness and beauty in cultures too, in different cultures. So just last night I was reading this book on Alaska. I don't know why I'm reading a book on Alaska, but I am. And the guy was talking about some Irish immigrants there, and he said some things with the Irish immigrants about them like drinking and fighting. And that's I guess part of my heritage in a way. Now, I don't have that in my family. That's not something that's been much of an issue with but that's my lineage. But on the other side, we're poets and we're artists, and there's something beautiful about the Irish culture. If you went, I've never been to Ireland, so I haven't experienced. But when I talk to people who go there, there's like a beauty there that's wonderful, and that's I think seeing that and seeing like God created something special and unique. Again, I grew up in America, so it's a whole different thing for me. But, if I went to Ireland, I'd probably see something. I know when I've traveled around the world, I've seen such beauty and such incredible things in different cultures, and learning to appreciate that and understand that. It's a beautiful thing. That's part of what we're meant to see, and part of the design of who God made us to be,
Right.
Definitely. What's up, good people? My name is David Bowens, and I'm a worship leader here at Orchard Hill Church.
And my name is Chris Jameson. I am also a worship leader here at Orchard Hill Church. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.
If you want to check out more, there should be something popping up around now about a recent upload on this screen. Please check it out, and we have so many more other videos for you guys to check out.
Thanks again for watching.
We'll catch you guys next time.